Started. Awesome. Well, hi everyone. I want to thank you for joining me today. Um, I know that when a lot of people hear the word leadership, they often think of titles, positions, or authority, but really, leadership is something that we can all practice every day, regardless of our role. So today's session is about how we respond when things become difficult. Specifically, how do we lead through pressure, resistance, and uncertainty? So my hope is that you leave with a few practical tools today that you can use immediately. Whether you're leading a team, you're managing a project, you're influencing your colleagues, or simply just navigating challenges in your own work. So I want to start today with this idea. Leadership is not a title. I want you to think about someone who has positively influenced you. It could be a supervisor, but it could also be a coworker, maybe a teacher, a mentor, a friend, or a family member. And then ask yourself, did they have formal authority over you? Did they have that title? Often the people who influence us most are the people sorry. Often the people who influence us most are not the people with the biggest titles. They're the people who set the tone, they build the trust with each other, they're supporting you, they're making difficult decisions, and they demonstrate courage, right? That's leadership. So, leadership is not a title, but it is how you show up when things get difficult. So, leadership is all about setting the tone. You don't need a title to set the tone in a meeting. You don't need the title to build trust with a colleague. You don't need a title to support someone who's struggling. And you don't need a title to make difficult decisions. There's hard decisions that are right decisions, but you don't need a title to do those things. And you don't need a title to demonstrate courage. And so that is why this conversation, this presentation is applying to all of us. It's not just those with the leadership title. So leadership feels really easy when everything's going well, right? And we have these times when everyone's agreeing, the resources are plentiful. We don't have to worry about the budget. Outcomes are really clear, and it's easy to be confident and steady in those things. But leadership gets tested when change occurs, when people are resistant, when priorities conflict with each other, information is incomplete, and expectations are high. These are the moments that people are watching. They're watching how we respond. They're watching whether we become defensive or avoidant or reactive, or whether we stay grounded in who we are, even during those testing pressure moments. So, one of the things, the quotes that I really like is pressure doesn't create character, it reveals it. So this is really important because pressure often shows us what is already happening inside of us, right? Beneath the surface. It reveals those habits, the assumptions, the values, and our default reactions. And the goal really is not to be perfect under pressure. The goal is to become more aware of how we respond so we can choose a better response. So this slide is all about the three leadership challenges, and I feel like they're really common among leadership or just in general. The first one we have is resistance. People don't always support change. So sometimes resistance is showing up as questions, frustrations, maybe some silence or pushback or hesitation. And sometimes as the leader or the person leading the charge for whatever it is, we can take it kind of personally. But many times it's just a sign that people just need clarity, maybe some context, and maybe they need extra support because they feel like they're going to have to know it all from the beginning, but that's not really what we're needing. So second is uncertainty. You don't always have the answers, right? This is especially difficult because people are often looking to leaders for certainty. When things change, we're looking to the leader to tell us, hey, this is what's going to go on. But that doesn't always happen because sometimes our leaders don't even know what's going on sometimes. And so, strong leadership really is not about pretending to know it all. Everybody knows that you don't know it all. So, just pretending to know it all is not going to build that trust. But you can say something like, hey, here's what we know. Here's what we're going to do. And here's what we don't know yet. The third thing is pressure. So, pressure often comes with deadlines. They're not going to go away. We have expectations that are not leaving, and we have competing priorities. We also sometimes have like limited resources, whether that's the budget, whether that's people. And under those pressures, we may move faster because we're trying to get everything done because there's so much that we need to do, but that's not always better. And that's why we need to have intentional responses. So, in the chat, which one do you think shows up most in your work? Resistance, uncertainty, or pressure? Pressure, pressure, resistance. Yeah. Everybody's got so much to do, right? Uncertainty currently. Yeah, I think there's a lot of times when we're navigating, I mean, we just changed leaders, right? So that brings about some uncertainty. You might have different things happening within your department that creates that uncertainty. Sometimes we have change that we don't control, and sometimes people don't support that change. And that can create some challenges. The pressure, we're never going to be able to get rid of deadlines or the expectations or those competing priorities. That's just always going to be there. And so having these challenges, having a way to go through these challenges is really going to be meaningful. So this slide is really about our default reactions. What happens under pressure? A lot of the times we react instead of respond. We avoid difficult conversations. And sometimes that feels easier in the moment, right? We're just going to not even think about it. We're going to not talk about it. Sometimes we start over controlling because we already have this uncertainty. We need to know that I have some control over something. And that feels more comfortable than just letting your team do what they do best. Sometimes that can mean being defensive because you feel like you're being criticized or maybe misunderstood. And most times you might have losing sight of priorities. Everything feels urgent. And so you lose sight of what's actually important. And the thing is that all of these things are normal. These reactions are human reactions. We cannot change what we don't notice. So the question is really not, do I ever react poorly under pressure? I think we all can say we have before. The better question is, what is my pattern under that pressure? Do I react? Do I avoid? Do I start controlling? Do I become defensive? Do I, rush into action without actually knowing what is my priority? And so once we start noticing that, we can start changing how we are responding. So I want to show you a few frameworks now. And the first framework is pause before you react. Research on emotional intelligence suggests that effective leaders create space between the event that happens and their response. This allows the leaders and all of us to intentionally react rather than react emotionally. And so a lot of the times, most people are going from the event and they are reacting. Something happens and we immediately respond to it. Someone sends an email and we immediately start thinking that they hate us. Someone says something frustrating and we're immediately sending them an email to let them know. A decision's made and we complain. But strong leadership really is creating that space between the event and how we respond. And so this is why this framework is about pausing. So instead of that event and reaction, we're going to have the event, we're going to pause, we're going to give some perspective in our minds, and then we're going to have a response. That pause gives us time to think. So we're not just immediately going into what our first emotional reaction is. That perspective piece really helps us to understand, okay, what else can be true? It really is helping us to go through the assumptions that we're making. And our response means that we're choosing our next step intentionally instead of reacting emotionally. So I do want to say that this is not about ignoring our emotions. Emotions are giving us information. It's giving us information about how we are handling it. But emotions don't have to drive the entire response that we have. So that small pause can prevent our emotional reaction. The second framework is called the ladder of assumptions. And this really helps us understand how we quickly move from facts to action. And this framework comes from an organizational learning researcher named Chris Argyris. I'm probably butchering that last name, but it really demonstrates how quickly we move from observable facts to assumptions and then to actions, often without realizing it. We're going through this ladder so fast sometimes. At the bottom of the ladder is facts. These are the things that actually happened. The next one is interpretation. This is where we begin assigning meaning to things that are happening. And remember, our interpretation is oftentimes by, how we grew up, what things we've experienced before. And then we move to assumptions. And this is where we start filling in the blanks. We're really good about filling in the blanks whenever something happens, even though it could be way, way off. I know that I make assumptions, we all make assumptions, and sometimes we really need to just work through the assumption to make sure that that's actually what's going on. We have the conclusion, and this is where in our mind, we are deciding what must be true. And then we move to action. And this is where what we do is based off of the conclusion that we've reached. The problem is that we often climb this ladder very quickly, and sometimes we don't even realize that we're doing it. So, a helpful way to use this is that, um, we don't want to react to what we feel like is happening. And we often react to the story we've created in our head. So we want to use this tool to really slow down and think about what is actually happening, what facts are actually there. And I want to walk you through an example of this. So if we're talking about the ladder of assumptions, oh, we skip the bottom rung, the facts. Oh, yes. Okay. I understand what you're saying. We usually skip the bottom rung. Yes. Yes. So a lot of the times, when we're thinking about an example, the facts, your boss canceled a meeting. What could be the next thing that we think about? Our interpretation of that. Well, I guess it could depend on what relationship you have with your boss, but if you don't have a relationship where you can just go, "Hey, why did you cancel that meeting?" Sometimes we could say, "Well, that's kind of unusual." So our assumption, obviously, they're upset with me, right? I did something wrong. The conclusion, you're in trouble. You start thinking of every single thing that you could have done. You're like, okay, um, I guess maybe I did this. I don't know. And then we go into action. We're becoming defensive. We're, avoiding the conversation maybe because we don't even know what's going on. Maybe we start over explaining ourselves and we start worrying. I don't know about y'all, but I can think of a million different things whenever I start filling in the blanks of these assumptions. So notice what happened here. The only fact that happened was that the boss canceled the meeting. everything else became a story that we told ourselves that was on top of that fact. And yeah, we probably do skip the bottom rung, right? The facts. And so this happens all the time at work. So someone doesn't respond to an email. We're like, okay, obviously they hate me. Or they're sending an email and they have all caps. They're yelling at me, right? And even though their keyboard might be broken, we don't know. Someone seems really quiet in a meeting. They're usually really talking to you, and then they they're not. Well, what's going on? So before we know it, we've created this whole story in our head. So this is where I really want to give us uh, the leadership pause. So we're going to stop and we're going to think about these questions. So before reacting, let's ask ourselves, what am I feeling? This matters because the emotions influence our interpretation, right? So if I'm anxious, I may assume the worst. If I'm frustrated, I might become short with people. If I'm embarrassed, I might become defensive. What assumptions am I making? So this is connecting back to the ladder of assumptions, responding to the facts and not the story that you're telling yourself. What outcome do I want? And this really helps us move from that emotion to the intention that we want behind whatever's going on. Do you want to be right or do you want to build the trust? Do you want to vent or do you want to solve the issue? Think about that. That can help us determine which way we're going to respond. What response aligns with my values? And this is really all about being intentional to who we actually are. So the best response is often not the quickest response. It's the response that reflects who we want to be and what we stand for. So remember, take those small pauses so that way you can make better decisions. So values are your anchor. I know our office talks a lot about values. We do value summits, and we talk a lot about a values compass. And when uncertainty is high, values become your compass. They help us to make decisions when there's not a perfect answer. So think about this and ask yourself, what do you stand for? What matters most? How do I want to be remembered? How do I want people to experience me? Those questions really help us get grounded on how we want to react. So if you value respect, you need to listen before dismissing someone's concerns, right? If you value accountability, we also need to own our part of missing something if we did, instead of just blaming others. People trust that consistency. They may not always like every decision that you make, but they're more likely to trust the leaders who are steady, they're consistent, they're honest, and they're values driven. So we've probably all seen the circle of control. And this slide is all about how we stay grounded and how we focus our energy. There's three circles. There's the control circle, the influence circle, and the circle of concern. So the first circle that we're going to talk about is the circle of concern, and this is the outer circle. And these are all things that we might care deeply about, but we can't fully control them. So examples of this: politics, the economy, institutional decisions, other people's choices. We can be concerned about those things, but we have no control over it. Influence. And so this is that one that's like relationships, the conversations, the ideas, team morale, how we frame a challenge. We can influence how all of those things are going on. But the only one that we have full control over is the center circle. And these are things like your actions, your attitude, your preparation, your communication, your next step, things like that. And what happens is that we we get stuck in only caring about that outer circle, and we spend so much time and emotional energy in that outer circle. We're worrying about what might happen. We replay decisions that we didn't even make. We focus on people who we can't control. We get stuck in that frustration of things that we have no control over. And so when you're standing strong in your leadership, we're asking ourselves, what do I actually have control over? What can I influence? What do I need to release? And so strong leaders are not just, ignoring the outside circle, but they're simply not living in the outside circle and only caring about that and only worrying about all of that outer circle. They're worried and they're concerned about their control circle. So, just a little scenario that I want to talk through. Let's talk about the budget reductions. Budget reductions are announced. What can you control? What can you influence? What can you not control? Enter in some answers in the chat and let's see what we can control, influence, and not control. Well, we definitely, yeah, how much we spend. We can control that, right? We can't control the fact that leadership made the decision to cut. We don't know maybe why they decided. We can't control that. We can influence how our team is handling it, how we communicate budget reductions to the team. Yeah, exactly. You can control your performance and productivity, influence department expenditures. Yeah. We can influence our reaction, right? We can control maybe what others see us reacting. Yeah, so think about this and just think about the circle of control and how we have our circle of control. The other things around we might be able to influence, but we cannot control everything. So now I want to bring us kind of all together. And this is called the STAND framework. I kind of just made it up of different leadership concepts and wanted to put it into a simple framework. And I'm going to call it the STAND framework. So this is about providing a practical way to apply maybe resilience, that emotional intelligence, that intentional decision making during challenging situations. So I'm going to take y'all through this. The first one, S, stop and breathe. We're going to pause before reacting. We're going to give yourself a moment to notice what is happening internally. So take that moment to pause. We're going to think before reacting. We're going to ask ourselves, what are the facts? What story am I telling myself? What assumptions am I making? And then we're going to anchor ourselves to our values because our values drive the behaviors, right? They drive ultimately the culture of our department, our organization, and they also drive who we want to be, who we are internally. So asking yourselves, what kind of leader do I want to be in this moment? How do I want people to experience me? What response would reflect my values? The N stands for navigate what you can control. So ask yourself, what is within my circle of control? We can't influence everything, but what can I influence? What is outside of my control? And then we're going to decide and move forward. We're going to make that decision and move forward. What is the next best step that I can do, that I can make with the information that I have? With being able to take that breath, with thinking it through, with anchoring to our values and navigating what you can control. The goal is not to eliminate the pressure because we all know that pressure is going to be there. The goal is really to process how we respond to that pressure with clarity and intention. So this STAND framework really helps us to hopefully avoid leading from impulse and it helps us to lead from purpose, from that intentionality. And so I want to apply STAND to maybe a realistic workplace scenario. Let's think about this. You're leading a project that your team has spent months preparing for. 2 weeks before implementation, your leadership decides to change direction. Your team is frustrated. People are asking questions that you don't have the answers for. Some team members are openly criticizing the decision, and you are expected to keep this project moving. But you don't have all of the complete information yourself. This is the kind of situation where many people might react quickly. They might complain, they might become defensive, they might just avoid their team altogether, they might overpromise things, and sometimes they might even shut down completely. But let's apply STAND to this. What will you do first? Well, feel free to enter in the chat as I'm going through this too. Before you start sending the maybe frustrated email back, ask yourself, hey, what am I feeling? Remember, we're going to stop and breathe. We're also going to think. We're going to think before we react. What else can we consider? Use that ladder of assumptions. Well, the facts are that leadership changed the direction. Can't change that. That's a fact. That the team is frustrated, that you don't have all the answers. But we might be making an assumption that, hey, they changed the direction 2 weeks before. Obviously, they don't value our work. This project is going to fail. My team's going to lose confidence in me. Those assumptions may or may not be true, but let's think about it. Think before reacting. And then anchor to your values, right? What values are going to guide you through this? How do you want to show up? How do you want people to experience you? So think about that and things you might say to the team in this scenario are, hey, I know that this change is frustrating. I don't have all the details yet, but I can share what I know and maybe get your questions and continue communicating as we learn more. And then we're going to navigate. What can you control? You can control your tone, maybe your communication, your next steps, and you can influence maybe the team morale, how we're navigating the questions, how we organize the work that we're doing and moving forward. And then we're going to decide and move forward, right? The next best step might be to schedule a team meeting to clarify what we do know, what we don't know, to collect those questions, and maybe you can bring them up to somebody else. So this is all about leadership. It's not about the title, it's about how we show up. And it's not because we have all the answers, but it's because we create a steadiness in the moment of uncertainty. So as we wrap up, here are the main takeaways that I want you to take from today. First, separate facts from assumptions. Second, focus on what you can control. Pause before reacting. Lead from your values, and use STAND when pressure rises. So it's not all about being unaffected by pressure. It's about responding with that clarity, the courage, and the character when pressure is present. Thank you all for joining today. I really appreciate your willingness to reflect and how we show up whenever we're dealing with pressure and resistance and uncertainty. So my hope is that you leave today with one tool, and I will see y'all next time.